Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Tech Talk On Air, brought to you by PLDT Enterprise in partnership with One News. I'm your host for this afternoon, Dr. Danny Laurel, and I'm very pleased to be welcoming everyone who is streaming. And we are, of course, streaming live right now on the Facebook and YouTube pages of PLDT as well as One News, and it will also be broadcast on television on Signal TV for all of us subscribers here. So do be engaged and join us as we try and upskill. I also want to preface this by saying this is, of course, one of the biggest webinars that we will be ever seeing during this lockdown or extended community quarantine. And we are trying our best to keep up with the times and try out our tools. So do bear with us. We will make this as seamless as possible. Now, why are we doing this first of all? Now, to say that these times are unprecedented, to say that we need to redefine our ways of working and living is probably the understatement of the entire century. And when this pandemic came about in late December and towards the start of February, at least for our country, it has been a very difficult thing to be witnessing, a horror show, so to speak. But now we've actually had time to take a step back and understand with better data, with better testing capabilities, with experience from other regions, other nations, other countries, how we can actually act and be better agents and actually shape our future, not be too scared about it. So we've been talking so long about the future of work. And the future of work is actually here right now. So what are the objectives of this session? This is going to be an hour and a half. We're going to be hearing from 4 different speakers and then the insights from 6 industry leaders. Well, what we want to do is, first of all, take a step back, understand what the data is really telling us, separate the fake news from the real news, let's say, and also using this data, understand how we can shape our not just global landscape, but also our economic policies here in the country and see how our industries can cope with all of these new normal, so to speak. And finally, a very big part of this, and also the title of our session, is Tech Talk, because the main thing that we want to understand today is also how technology can play a crucial role as we guide and are entering into this cusp or this new territory that is completely uncharted. So do sit back, relax, and enjoy all of the coming insights. Now, without further ado, I will officially begin today's program. Let's welcome on our screens today the President and CEO of EPLDT Group. He is, of course, the Senior Vice President and the Head of PLDT and Smart Enterprise Business Groups, Mr. Joby Hernandez.
Thank you very much, Danny. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of PLDT Enterprise and One News channel, I would like to thank all of our viewers for tuning in to Tech Talk On Air. To say that the last month has been a watershed moment in humanity's history would be the understatement, as Danny has mentioned. This pandemic has and continues to change lives, disrupt industries, and transform the world on a daily basis. As we continue to hope for the flattening of the curve and a clearer path towards a new normal, we recognize that our places of work and play are fundamentally transformed, that our ways of working and living are essentially changed. This then brings us back to a very basic and human question. Quo vadis? What is next? While the sea of uncertainty around us will not part anytime soon, it is incumbent upon us to redefine what tomorrow will look like, not only for our businesses, but for society at large. And this begins with us. It was, I think, Gandhi who providentially said, "Be the change you wish to see." A new day is here, and at PLDT Enterprise, we call this day zero. We need to hit the ground running as we welcome both the challenges and the opportunities of a post-COVID operating environment. And our Tech Talk On Air episode today aims not only to help businesses figure out what comes next, but more importantly, how we can shape it. So to jumpstart today's discussion, we have none other than the Global Data's Head of Thematic Research, Mr. Cyrus Miwawala, to share his insights on the global economic landscape we're faced today. Also joining us is renowned economist and academic Dr. Bernie Villegas to discuss his forecasts for the local economy and how this will affect the way different sectors operate. To help us understand how technology will allow us to move forward in this new era of work, we have none other than PLDT Enterprise's Mr. John Gonzalez. And lastly, to contextualize the future of work, we also have key thought leaders and decision makers from across industries to share their expert insights. Now is the time to do things in an all-new way, to innovate, transform, and truly welcome digital transformation. At PLDT, we've always believed that for technology to be effective, it must bring real value to the life of each and every single Filipino. In other words, as our chairman has mentioned it, Mr. Manny V. Pangilinan, technology is the ultimate equalizer of opportunities. So today, we invite all viewers to join us in welcoming an unprecedented future for work, business, and life. Thank you, and a pleasant good afternoon to all of you.
Thank you so much, Sir Jovi. I think your
Thank
opening
you.
remarks were so optimistic. It's actually about welcoming this future that is here now and not fearing what we don't know, but actually be excited about that. So thank you so much for those
Thank you.
opening remarks. And as Sir Jovi mentioned, of course, we will be kicking off the discussion and jumpstarting that with our first presenter who's actually joining us all the way from the UK in London. He is a highly respected equity analyst from the investment banking sector, and he has studied technology, media, and the telecom industry for the last 25 years. So really an expert when it comes to this field. Now, he leads the development of Global Data's thematic research arm, and that is an ecosystem. It's a single integrated platform for looking at all themes impacting all companies across different sectors. He is also a regular commentator on tech themes in different outlets of media, for instance, CNBC, Bloomberg, and the BBC, and he was also ranked the #1 equity analyst by Bloomberg in 25 global TMT stocks in 2017. So here to share with us the latest data on the impact of the coronavirus on the global economy and also the different specific industries, how to cope with it, as well its significant effects on the international economic and trade activities and general global insights that will help us respond and thrive and recover amidst the crisis. Please welcome on screen, you've got Global Data's PIC's Head for Thematic Research, Mr. Cyrus Miwawala.
Thank you, Danny, for inviting me on your show. So I'm Cyrus Miwawala. I'm head of thematic research at Global Data, and I'm going to talk to you about the impact of COVID-19 on the global economy. So let's start by looking at infection rates globally. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any slowdown in the virus's exponential growth. COVID-19 has now spread to 187 countries worldwide, with around 2.5 million confirmed cases globally. And that's climbing at around 100,000 new cases per day. There have been 165,000 reported deaths, and that's almost double the number of deaths just 10 days ago. 624,000 people have recovered from the infection globally. China was the first country to record the outbreak of this virus, so it has become the benchmark for comparing the spread of this disease. 7 countries have now exceeded China's case count. They are the US, Spain, Italy, France, Germany, the UK, and now Turkey. The number of confirmed cases in the US has crossed 750,000. The second highest number of confirmed cases is in Spain at about 200,000, and then Italy at about 180,000. China's confirmed cases are just 83,000. Now, the figures I've just shown you should be treated with extreme caution, especially when making comparisons between countries. Whilst these are, the figures reported by the governments of these countries, their true accuracy depends on the approach to testing and reporting taken in each country. Countries who test more are likely to report higher cases. The US has the most infections, but it's also done more testing than any other country. As the graph shows, the US has done 4 million tests to date. So it's not surprising it has the highest number of positive tests. Italy has done more testing per head of population than any major country. It's tested 22,000 people per million of population. And recently, many countries like Russia and Spain are rapidly increasing their testing in recent days. And of course, we all know that to get out of lockdown, testing is the key. Now, this is not a nice slide for me to present, but plotting the course of new deaths from COVID-19 can help us identify the turning point for each country. The chart shows death trajectories for selected countries using a 7-day rolling average of new deaths from COVID-19. Every country wants to flatten this curve and then get it down as quickly as possible. China has succeeded in doing this with one of the lowest number of reported deaths for a major economy at less than 5,000. By contrast, the US curve is still on the upward trajectory with over 40,000 reported deaths. The curves for Italy and Spain first started to decline a few days ago. Now the UK and France appear to be plateauing as well. The pipeline of clinical trials for COVID-19 cures is crowded. There are almost 1,000 COVID-19 trials globally. See the top left-hand chart in the slide I'm showing you. Now, these are trials for both novel and existing drugs, and they're trials for both vaccines and therapeutics. Some clinical trials are just in the planning stage. China has the largest number of trials by far at 348 clinical trials as of today. The US is catching up fast with China and now has 133 trials. Global Data polled our pharma and biotech clients to find out how long it would take to develop an effective vaccine. And 48% of our clients said they were very confident that the pharmaceuticals industry globally could develop an effective vaccine within 12 months. When it comes to the global economic impact, COVID-19 has devastated every major economy. All major stock markets are down year to date. The US market is down 11%, UK down 24%, Brazil is down 47%. China, by contrast, is only down 6%. To respond to this, governments have huge stimulus packages. In the US, President Trump has announced a $4.5 trillion stimulus package. In Japan, $1 trillion, Germany, $1.2 trillion, and the UK, $446 billion in stimulus. Now, this graph shows the volatility has increased in all types of markets: stock markets, commodity markets, FX markets, debt markets, IPO markets. Oil prices have collapsed in the last few days, with Brent crude trading at barely a few cents over $20 a barrel yesterday. Many stock markets fell 30% between the start of 2020 and the last week of March. Since then, they've been trending upwards. Across almost every major country, employment figures make for grim reading. The International Labour Organization estimates that 6.7% of worldwide working hours will be wiped out in Q2 of 2020, and that's equivalent to 195 million workers. Around 5 million people in China have lost their jobs in January and February of this year. In the US, 22 million people filed unemployment claims in the 4 weeks since the national emergency was declared. The chart on the left of this slide shows that the number of active job vacancies advertised fell 22% worldwide over the last 30 days, and that's a great leading indicator of economic growth. In the UK, the number of active job vacancies fell 41% over the last 30 days. In India, they fell 24%. Now, we've recalibrated our economic growth forecast by country, and global GDP is now going to fall by around 2.3% in 2020, according to the median growth projection from leading investment banks. China is the only economy that is projected to have a positive economic growth in 2020, albeit just 1.4%. Every other major economy is expected to shrink this year. France's GDP is projected to decline by 5.1% in 2020. Germany will be down 5%, Italy down 7%, and the US down 5%. Now, this chart shows the trends from a business confidence poll conducted by Global Data. We received over 14,000 responses, and the poll shows two things. First, that concern over the spread of COVID-19 remains extremely high. And second, whilst more business executives are optimistic on their future growth prospects than those who are pessimistic, this business optimism has declined significantly just in the last week. So finally, to sum up the economic impact of COVID-19 on the world economy, major markets remain volatile. Oil prices have collapsed to $20 a barrel. Many economists have cut their GDP forecast for every major country. Global GDP is now forecast to decline by 2.3% in 2020. Many economists predict a recession. The US has a historic surge in people applying for unemployment benefits. Governments all over the world are responding with aggressive stimulus measures. Central banks have cut interest rates, and unemployment is soaring. That's it for me.
Mawawalia, for that data. Actually, I mean, it was very difficult not just to compile that, but also to have to report these sort of statistics. But there are a lot of things that we can gain from your talk. For instance, the idea that, if I'm not mistaken, 48% are confident on a vaccine. So there is, of course, a clearer picture on that. It's no longer a pipe dream. It's actually things that are moving, wheels that are actually turning. The number of recoveries, as you mentioned, and China as well, being able to post a positive GDP growth this year is something to perhaps be celebrating. So nevertheless, a lot of questions on not just these statistics, but also your thoughts on how this might affect Philippine industries in particular as well, and what people and economies should be doing at this moment. So thank you so much for those insights.
Thank you.
We move on from a global and high-level perspective towards a domestic perspective on how the Philippines is faring, let's say, in these turmoil or difficult times compared to the rest of the world. So our speaker is somebody that is, of course, a very, very renowned economist. He is a professor at the University of Asia and the Pacific and the research director of the Center for Research and Communication in Manila. He has a PhD in economics from Harvard University and is a certified public accountant, having been one of the CPA board top-notchers. He obtained his bachelor's degree in commerce and the humanities, both at summa cum laude from De La Salle University and at Harvard. He was the youngest, or one of the youngest ever, to be a teaching fellow at the College of Arts and Sciences at the young age of 21. His special fields of study are development economics, social economics, business economics, and strategic management. He has also served in the Pacific Board of Economics of Time magazine and writes regularly for both the local and international newspapers such as the International Herald Tribune and the Asian Wall Street Journal. So to share with us, as already mentioned, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic to our Philippine economy and also other Asian countries, as well as data on his latest economic forecast, please welcome on your screens Dr. Bernie Villegas.
Thank you very much, Danny, for inviting me to this Tech Talk. And good afternoon to all my fellow speakers and all the viewers of this program. Let me start by saying that we have been hit by this pandemic at the most favorable economic circumstances ever in our history. And let me explain. So there's a lot of talk about the new normal, but there will always be the old normal that consists of our competitive advantage in the Asia-Pacific region. The first is that we, together with Indonesia and Vietnam, are probably among the few emerging markets still enjoying what is known as a demographic dividend. That's the first sweet spot that we have, which means that not only do we have a lot of human resources, that we're providing the whole world with more than 10 million overseas workers, and I will address this later on. We also have a large pool of more than 1 million workers for our BPO IT sector. That definitely is one of the sectors that will most survive this pandemic. With a young population, we also have the tremendous advantage of having a strong, vigorous domestic market, which insulates us many times from world crises, whether recession, financial crisis. So when the world is turning down, we've seen over the last 20 years that the Philippines can still grow because our businesses focus on selling to 110 million Filipinos. And that is also going to happen this year. In fact, a recent report of the International Institute of Finance in Washington identifies China, Indonesia, and the Philippines as the only economies that will post a positive growth, albeit low, between 1% to 2%. But that is because we are focusing on our local consumers, and our private consumption consists of 70% of our GDP. The second sweet spot we have, and I already referred to it, is that we are at the epicenter of the most dynamic economic territory in the world today, which is Asia Pacific, especially with China, India, and the ASEAN economic community as our neighbors. And as everyone knows, these are the economies that will recover earlier than the rest of the world. And we definitely can take advantage of our geographic proximity to these economic giants. The third sweet spot that we have is fiscal. Thanks to several administrations, at least 3 administrations in the past, we have maintained fiscal responsibility. Our debt to GDP ratio is one of the lowest in the region, only at 30%. I'm sure many of you know that debt to GDP ratios in countries like the United States, Italy, Spain are more than 100%. That means that our government can really act as a prime mover in attaining recovery through pump priming. That's exactly what our government is going to do. Be at the forefront of making sure that our recovery can be, as much as possible, a V-shaped recovery by priming the pump with literally hundreds of billions of pesos. First, to support those who have been unemployed, but more importantly, to really push the economy through the build program. And we can borrow a lot of that because we are still fiscally responsible. And the other thing I'd like to say, that's not exactly a sweet spot, but let's say a temporary advantage, is that, as I already mentioned, our export to GDP ratio is very low, so that even if the world, as Cyrus was saying, is going to pose large negative growth rates, we are not going to be as affected as countries like Singapore, Hong Kong, Thailand, Malaysia, that are very dependent on exports. We can still have a positive growth rate, and my forecast is, as long as we can have a normal situation by July 1st, I'm assuming, and of course, I may be wrong, but I'm assuming that by July 1st, there will be a lot more freedom of movement of people, of goods and services. As long as that will happen, then in the second semester, we can have a quick recovery so that we can grow at 4% GDP-wise second semester, with 0% in the first semester. That still means a 2% GDP growth for the whole year. Now, which industries are going to lead the V-shaped recovery? Very obviously, it's food and agribusiness. In fact, as we all know, that's the sector that has been least affected because people have to eat. And that's what has been propping up our economy, from the farm to post-harvest to logistics, supply chain, to manufacturing, to retailing. It's food that will definitely predominate in the recovery. And I'm very glad that this pandemic has finally gotten our leaders to realize what we have been telling them all these years. Agriculture is the most important sector on which they have to invest a lot more in infrastructure services and other services needed by the farmers so that we can attain greater and greater food security. Then I have the 7 F's of the consumer industries: fashion, furnishings, fun, fitness, Facebook, just to represent all the digital products and services, and formation, all types of educational services, whether formal, non-formal, and informal. These have been the 7 consumer goods and services that have characterized our consumer-oriented industry. Now, which ones of these will suffer? And entertainment, something that especially Filipinos cannot live without. Now, which of these 7 will enjoy a quick recovery and which will definitely suffer for some time? Well, it's very clear that tourism and travel will take a long time to rebound. And so I cannot be optimistic about these 2 sectors. The only probably exception is if we know how to market our own destinations to 110 million Filipinos, then we can get our domestic tourism to recover as quickly as possible. Filipinos like to travel since they will not be traveling abroad for a long time. If there's more freedom of movement along the archipelago, you can be sure a lot of Filipinos will do what is known as domestic tourism, which can somehow improve the travel sector a little. So our Philippine Airlines or City Pacific can carry Filipinos from one island to another in domestic tourism. Another sector, obviously, that will lead the recovery would be all those related to health services, whether pharmaceuticals, all types of health foods, even fitness. People are going to be very much conscious in the new normal about improving their immunity, because that's one of the things that we learned. It's not only the idea of being prepared with all sorts of medicine and curative products, but to make sure that our citizens have enough rest, enough food, and enough fitness. Another sector that will definitely recover, as soon as we can open our classrooms, would be education. In fact, there are a lot of conglomerates that have invested heavily in schools. I will not exaggerate the importance of online classes. Only the Ateneos, LaSalle, UPs can do that. 90% of our students still have to go to class, and that means that we really have to open up our classroom as soon as possible. And that will definitely contribute to a big portion of the recovery in terms of the expenditures related to education, transport, of course, all the expenditures of schools. Another sector that will benefit from the
Okay, we seem to have some technical difficulties there, but he did already, Dr. Villegas did share with us some very key insights here. He did mention that we have 3 things that are going to keep us through or push us through this pandemic. First of all, the demographic dividend. We are a young population, generally healthy population, and in particular, we have a big population servicing the BPO IT sector and also bringing in remittances to our country. He said the second thing is that our domestic markets are very strong. So we are less reliant on supply chain disruptions that come from offshore and also export industry. issues here because of the pandemic. He does say that he believes that we can still post positive growth of 1 to 2%. So that is a very inspiring thing to be hoping for. Asia being a sweet spot is going to be saving us demographically. The third is our fiscal position. He says we're still in a rather healthy position, allowing the government to respond and, of course, provide relief, fiscal stimulus in these times. He is predicting a V-shaped recovery, and he is identifying specific sectors, particularly health and fitness and education, that will pull us through these tough times. So thank you again, Dr. Bernie Villegas. Now let's move on to, of course, the last but definitely not the least presentation. Our next speaker, he's currently the Vice President and the head of the Enterprise Digital Solutions Business Unit of PLDT Enterprise. He's actually in charge of managing technology and business consulting for current and emerging technology portfolio of PLDT, ePLDT, and its subsidiaries to support the corporate innovation initiatives of all of its enterprise customers. So here to share with us the role of technology in determining and shaping the new era of work, please welcome on screen Mr. John Gonzalez.
Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of PLDT Enterprise, it is my pleasure to talk to you online to speak about technology at play, new ways of working in the midst of COVID-19. As a telco and ISP, like many other utilities, we continue to employ and test our BCP measures to ensure business continuity to always operate regardless of a disaster or crisis. When the pandemic struck, we had to quickly, remotely, but securely work from home. However, many businesses were not prepared and had to rush the implementation of work from home initiatives just to keep operational. It brought, however, with it cybersecurity and data privacy risks. Unfortunately, some had to shut down operations completely and for many reasons. There was a huge dependency on brick and mortar operations with no alternative customer engagement models, primarily because our consumers were comfortably shopping in malls, dining in restaurants, and paying over the counter. The employees didn't have the right tools or infrastructure to work remotely, or their processes were just too manual to begin with. While many external factors hinder us, technology provides us with the potential to surpass the limitations set by our circumstances. The situation we're in has provoked us to shape and redefine the changes we've always wanted to see in our businesses. So, what will it look like down the road? Consumers and enterprises will adopt new ways of engagements post-COVID that will transform both customer and employee experience. For consumers, there's going to be an aggressive shift to digital engagements and channels, increased online transactions, usage of self-service and contactless operations, reliance on home delivery, expected capability to buy online, and potentially reduction of physical branches and stores. For enterprises, virtualization of key business processes, tracking of assets and goods, enhanced security protocols, and renewed governance policies. Remote work models for employees and heavy usage of collaboration tools, migrating customers to digital channels, reduced on-site servers and increased reliance on outsourced but managed data centers and cloud-based services, increased leverage on mobile apps and social media to rapidly understand consumer sentiments and develop new ideas, real-time data-driven operations using analytics and ERP systems that are built around triggers which helps understand consumer behaviors and provide insights to what the likely business outcome will be. Now, what are the possible technology considerations post-COVID that brings us to post-COVID, after COVID? Here, we segmented it into systems of records, systems of engagement, and systems of management, primarily because all three are very important. For systems of record, we have mobile and web-based business applications like ERP and consumer applications like e-commerce portals. This can be coupled with real-time analytics and business intelligence tools. For systems engagements, multi-channel platforms like chat, video, and voice engagement, and of course with help desk to support customers online. Multi-payment options and tools for internal collaborations. Lastly, we have systems of management to store, monitor, connect, and manage the whole customer lifecycle, from utilizing cloud or outsourced but managed data centers, employing cybersecurity to protecting your assets, IT resource monitoring tools, and of course, a secure broadband infrastructure. Now, the next question really is when, what, how do I move from here? Well, you can look at it in three ways. What you can do immediately during this crisis, what you can do when the situation settles down a bit or near term, and what you can do to define your new ways of working longer term. During this crisis, procure the essentials and create processes and policies to enhance your cybersecurity posture and reduce data privacy risk. While transitioning to normalcy, start assessing your IT assets if it conforms to industry standards and determine what applications can reasonably be migrated from on-prem to hybrid cloud infrastructures. Check manual processes and determine what can be automated, and start looking at new ways of engagement, either using mobile apps, digital payments, e-commerce, and the like. And lastly, enhance your business continuity plans and conduct regular BCP drills. Create ecosystems of partnership using community clouds that can bring together various health entities, educational institutions, logistics, government agencies, and other industry services. Use real-time analytics for quick decision making. Employ innovations like IoT sensors for contactless operations, and maybe look into integrated operation centers where you have a single view of all processes and data within your organization. Now, change is abound, and as mentioned by Jovi earlier, we at PLDT Enterprise call this day zero. So what exactly does this new day entail, and how do we enable a post-COVID Philippines? Evaluate what problems were encountered during COVID, and what are the things that you need to do in the next 6 months. Redefine the business by enabling e-commerce and digital channels. Build ecosystems and partnerships by adopting a business development mindset, and embrace change and get out of that rigidity trap. To summarize, we will reimagine the ways of working and reinstill a business development mindset. We will see an accelerated digital adoption and innovations proliferating around us. At the end of the day, it's not just about applying methods that others are applying. It's all about creating a culture of engagement that works for you, your customers, and your employees. Thank you.
So much for those insights, Mr. John Gonzalez of PLDT, telling us that we are in day zero and it all depends on the importance of investing in your IT assets. He did mention that earlier on when this came, there were some companies that were better positioned than others to take advantage of the shift. But now everyone is basically forced to move faster and to keep up with these new times. So thank you so much for those insights, sir. We'll get back to you with more questions on your presentation.
Thank you, Dan.
Okay, so at this point, again, thank you so much to our presenters. It's time to try and digest all of these new insights. And to do that and to help us with that, we have some industry experts here. Take a listen at who we will be hearing from next.
Representing the different industries, Ms. Bing Sibal Limhoco from retail, Mr. Alfie Deato from logistics, and Dr. Dan Lachica from manufacturing.
Okay, so I'll bring them in one by one. We will be hearing from the chairman of PCCI, of course, the Philippine Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She's actually the chairwoman. We need to highlight that. She's also the vice chair of PFA, Ms. Bing Sibal Limhoco. She will be talking about Hi, Bing, Commerce and Industry. She's actually the chairwoman. We need to
hello, good afternoon to you all.
Yes, so to join us on screen, we also have the SVP and CIO of LBC Express, Mr. Alfie Deato. He will be the representative of the logistics industry. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Danny. Good afternoon, Bing and everyone.
And also to discuss more about these insights, we have with us the president of SAPI, so the semiconductors industry, Dr. Dan Lachica. He will be representing not just the semiconductors industry, but also just the manufacturing industry in general. Hi, Doc Dan, and welcome to the broadcast.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. So a lot of insights there that we got, guys, from the numbers of COVID infections and recoveries and how that will impact global growth, towards the economic outlook that Doc Villegas was generally positive about, actually, compared to the rest of the world, and over to the technology space. Now, I wanted to kick off with Ma'am Bing. Do you agree, ma'am, with the insights of Doc Bernie Villegas that our Filipino habits are going to save us? We are a consumption-driven economy. Once, the lockdown is lifted, people are going to be spending, they want to be happy, and this is not dramatic have a dent on the retail industry. Or are you more pessimistic in terms of that?
No, I am also optimistic. I know we're going to have a V-shaped economy and not you. After hearing what he said about us being in the sweet spot, I agree with him because I saw this, and of course we have a buffer. Though now we have to reshape retailing in the new norm. So in order for us to take advantage of this, the first and foremost for us is to have the test kits for our employees as we go back to work. We must work on a resilient supply chain. And first and foremost, I would agree to have digital transformation, especially in the payment gateway. I want it to be the paperless and contactless. Just like Alipay, if we can do this as ASAP in all, because now when we order online, we have to do it, by paying, but still in the supermarkets and other retail stores, they still do not have this contactless payment avenue. And I feel we have to really push for this. Then we really have to invest after listening to Mr. Gonzalez, definitely invest on our online infrastructure because we were really caught unprepared, right? We had to make do with whatever we have about our internet, website, social media. We have to expand our call centers, capabilities, and expand delivery services in-house or outsource. And as the last one, I would like to promote franchising because it has been proven in the 2008 financial crisis in the US. Big restaurants closed, but those that did franchising even grew. And with this, I really believe we will have the V-shaped economy.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Bing, who is advocating and saying that Filipinos will continue to spend on such things. Now, I want to jump off on this point and bring in Sir Alfie, who is, of course, in LBC and the logistics industry. Even if I want to spend, and even if I want to buy certain things online, and even if payment systems are better, there is still a bottleneck in terms of logistics. This has been an essential business that has been going on even with the lockdown, but still the ports are crowded. It's very, very difficult. It's a high-risk industry for people. And another thing, sir, it's a traditional industry. How do you innovate right now there? How can you put in all this data, technology in an industry that is so reliant on movement and people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think the logistic industry in the last 3 to 4 years has really had so much changes. No, I think we're one of the most disrupted industries, aside from the financial markets as well. But to your question, on how do we go about this challenging times? After the closure of the air routes and the seaports have obviously been a challenge to the operations of LBC here in the Philippines, and I suppose it's for logistics as well. We have to move everything by land, which obviously changes the SLA. However, with the movement of basic goods and necessities in the country as something that is needed, across, we find new ways of operating and new ways of adjusting our businesses to align with this new model of business. Which is, I think, moving forward, I agree with the recommendations. I think we have to do contactless deliveries. Those are the things that we have to work on. We have to work on the IoT as well, to ensure that people are informed about their deliveries. And with this, the data center that John talked about as well, I think is very important. It has helped us move to work from home from being in the office all this time. And I know post-COVID, we would really have to look at how we worked previously and how we are to work in the new ways. Yes, Danny.
Thank you, sir. So interesting for you to say contactless delivery, and also work from home logistics requirement that we never thought we would actually hear, but such interesting innovations. Moving on, sir, to Dan Lachica. What really struck me in the presentation of Doc Bernie is he said that the fact that we are not exporting that much has saved us in this pandemic. But your industry is highly reliant on the export sector. It was supposed to be increasing. We had talked about that offline rather. You had a projection of 5% increases this year, and that's not going to be happening. How do you change the game when you want to now tap a domestic economy with products that are targeted for offshore consumption?
Well, in 2019, we actually grew to about $43.3 billion of exports, which is 61% of the total commodity exports of the Philippines. So from our perspective, we have been and continue to be big exporters for the Philippines. As you mentioned, in 2020, we've actually projected a 5% growth, but we kind of stumbled in the first quarter because of the Taal eruption. And we were no sooner trying to get back on track when this pandemic hit. And so, that 5% growth, basically, you can throw that out the window. The thing about it is that we need to continue exporting. That's why we respect the decision of the government to protect our workers and come up with a skeletal workforce. But understand that the backlog is pretty high. The emerging and technology trends are still continuing to have demand. And more importantly, we have several companies in the Philippines that produce components that supply COVID equipment. So that too will be a key necessity for the global economy. So I think we're looking forward to the new normal, which would involve allowing the electronics companies, manufacturing companies to ramp up. I know we've gotten a ghost green light to do 50% and see how we can mobilize our manpower and ensure that the cargoes are unhampered so that we can increase the production levels and hopefully help stimulate the economy and help recover part of what we've lost over the past, quarter and a half.
Thank you, Sir Dan. So looking at new avenues of manufacturing, actually, like you mentioned, we've been closely following our companies like IMI and Certec, for instance, that have now pivoted towards medical supplies. So a very interesting point here. We're not just limited in terms of what we have been doing before, but can now actually use the pandemic, so to speak, in innovating and looking at other types of manufacturing that we can bring not just to domestic markets but also to the world. So thank you so much for those insights. Now I'd like to bring in or introduce to you guys another set of panelists or insight sharers, so to speak. Let's take a listen at who we will be bringing in.
Representing the different industries, Mr. Ray Untal from IT BPM, Mr. Lito Villanueva from Banking, and Professor Richard Cruz from the Academe.
Okay, so exciting. Let's try and bring them into our stream here. First of all, representing the IT BPM industry, we have the President and CEO of IBPAP, Mr. Ray Untal. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, Danny.
Hi, sir. Okay, now joining the two of us, we have representing the banking industry, the Chief Innovation and Inclusion Officer of the YGC Group, Mr. Lito Villanueva.
Hi, good afternoon, Danny.
Hi, sir. And finally, representing the Academe, we have Professor Richard Cruz from the Asian Institute of Management.
Good afternoon, Danny.
Good afternoon, sir. Hi, gentlemen. So you heard from our speakers and you heard from our first batch of insights. I'll kick off with Sir Ray because it's been repeated on and on. The IT BPO sector is our saving grace. This actually was our saving grace or one of the legs of our economy for a long time already. The growth had been slowing and now you're back in the limelight. Tell us a bit more about the statistics here and how this lockdown or the new normal has actually changed your way of doing business.
Thank you again, Danny. It's amazing really how the first quarter and a half had been quite surreal, for many of us. And in fact, we got so busy with so many things that we didn't really realize that we have just done a recap of the 2019 figures for the IT BPO industry. And we, in fact, did grow quite reasonably. We are now in excess of 1.3 million Filipinos in employment. That's a 6% growth from 2018 and in excess now of $26.3 billion in revenue, which is a 7% increase in comparison to the previous year. And yes, when the ECQ was declared barely 5 weeks ago, we were really thankful then that the IT BPO industry has been identified as an essential industry, which in fact allowed us to execute a few things that allowed us to operationalize not just the skeletal workforce that we had in our office premises, but we were able to optimize our work from home capabilities. And we were given like a few days, I think about 4 or 5 days to do that. And while things were really crazy, logistically speaking at the time, when the dust settled, we saw that we were slightly above 50% productive. Now, that may be low, but in the context of many other industries not having been able to operate at all, that is a very positive development. And the thing is, unfortunately, with that number, we also realized that half of the workforce, or close to 500,000 in Luzon, is rendered unproductive which obviously translated to a significant revenue loss. And again, I would like to say thanks to my colleagues, the country heads, who have really gone out of their way to make their employees whole, pay wise, during this period, even if revenue was a challenge. And as we look into the future, and eventually when the ECP is lifted, we have in fact put together a plan, a framework, or a guidance, if you will, that looks into how we can further optimize not just our work from home capabilities, but as well as our existing office operations. And while the details are not really important in the context of this meeting, what we're trying to achieve here is that for those that are already effectively working from home, we want them to continue doing that while we address the other things around logistics, transportation, rapid testing, so that we can slowly bring back our workforce into the office premises. Before I wrap up this meeting, I think it's worthwhile for me to share a few insights that we have gathered from our conversations with our stakeholders. Dr. Villegas earlier mentioned that tourism and travel is really impacted, and that's true also for our sector. There has been a significant drop in terms of travel and tourism support, and we have seen that. But at the same time, we have observed that there were quite a few industries that has stepped up, or we've seen an uptick in terms of demand. Again, like what Dr. Villegas said earlier, I echo it again, healthcare. There's an upsurge of demand in that sector. Interestingly, we are also seeing quite a bit of movement in the financial services sector. I think it's also obvious that because of the demand now for telecommuting, the telecoms companies across the globe is really growing in terms of demand. And last but not the least is e-commerce. If you are paying attention to the stocks in the US, almost every stock has been battered, with the exception probably of a few. And one of those is Amazon. Amazon, if you look at its performance, it's 30%, 40% higher now than a year ago. And it's also true. You can see the proliferation of e-commerce in our local context. And I think, balancing both the challenges as well as the opportunities that we see down the road, we can see that at some point we can rebound from this and rebound well. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Sir Ray. So just to highlight that what you said, 50% are actually now able to work. So a very productive workforce regardless of the lockdown. And you're actually looking for this work from home scenario to be continuing as the new normal. So very interesting points there, sir. Let's move on to Sir Lito, who of course is not just the Chief Innovation Officer of Yuchenko, but also has been, championing fintechs since for such a long time. And if only, Lito, they had been, if the digital transactions had been there before this pandemic hit, it would have been such a great time to test that out. As it happens, a lot of things have happened before the banks were ready. Tell us, how are you coping in the banking industry? This might actually be a good thing to spur, all the growth that we have been asking for from the industry.
I thank you, Danny. I think more than anything else, I think the banking industry and even the financial services as a whole has been the front, back, and center of all of this, this crisis that we are now facing. So right now, there is no telling when or how this pandemic will end. But one thing is for sure, there is no going back to how it was before. So the crisis has brought to light the weaknesses in our society. And in fact, Danny, it showed us just how vulnerable the great majority of our population. So, but this is actually our showcase of the Filipinos' resiliency and our unique brand of Bayanihan. So we've seen a number of companies right now, especially digital companies that are practically providing digital platforms for free to government to be able to address some of those pain points in terms of delivering some basic services. And I think the impact of COVID to banking and fintech sectors is really dramatic because we have seen that coronavirus indeed spurred digital migration. No? So it forced Filipinos to go digital given the limited mobility. So through our collective efforts, we've seen that we are confident that we will make it all possible in terms of us being able to adapt to digital. So just to give you an example, Danny, no? So why is it that I said that banking and finance have been at the front, back, and center of this crisis? Because first and foremost, banking will definitely be providing the mechanism by way of providing the for example, the social amelioration disbursements of social subsidy based on the Bayanihan Act. And that has been one of the main pain points of the government in terms of quickly disbursing those funds to the 18 million families nationwide. So I think one of the things that I would like to highlight here is the fact that while the Philippines has been regarded globally as a as a model when it comes to financial inclusion and digitalization efforts, number one of course, primary to that would be the regulatory support from the BSP in terms of providing the the groundwork or the framework for us for allowing or enabling fintech players or banking industry to come up with some innovative ways of doing business. But unfortunately, this time around during the crisis, we have seen that still a good number of Filipinos, especially those in in the vulnerable segments of the society, are not really engaged in digitalization. So that's why the reason why we don't have that immediate and fast way of disbursing those funds digitally was because of this absence. So there has been a huge gap between having to have that regulatory framework and having to have that scale in terms of consumer adoption. Because I think what is primordial after during this crisis, there are two things that we need to focus on right now. One is financial education, and the other one is digital literacy. Because financial education is very much different from digital literacy. Because we've seen that still a huge number of Filipinos remain unbanked or underserved. And in fact, just to end this, this statement or this this insight from the banking industry, we have seen as well the massive efforts of both the banking and fintech sectors or industries to really accelerate their digitalization efforts in terms of coming up with responsive and relevant digital services and products catering to the requirements of the Filipinos right now. So I think one thing that I would want to also highlight is the fact that the digital investments or the funds put in by industries or by companies into digitalization efforts or digital transformation is well justified. And this is now how they will see the fruits of their labor in terms of them putting in so much equity or so much investments into digital. Because again, this is not just during this crisis, but again, as what Professor Dr. Villegas said, this is already our new normal, and this will be for the long haul. And I think we, again, as I've said, it will be very difficult for us to go back to where we were before. And I think digital is at the core, at the forefront of everything that we will do moving forward. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you, Lito. It's so staggering, what you mentioned, that what pushed this was the need to disperse money to the poorest of the poor, for example, ways for that, and that needed to be cashless in a population where cash is king. So this is such an important point. And as you mentioned, we had been relying on brick and mortar. That was still the growth strategy before all of these things happened. And now every bank is rethinking the new strategy and, taking into account how much money they're going to have to spend on this new pivot. So thank you so much for those insights. Moving on to Sir, of course, of the AIM. Another sector that I love and would like to understand better, because we had been discussing, even ahead of this broadcast, on the fact that education might be one of the longest ones to stay in a lockdown. Basically, it's one of the ones that you can do from home compared to others, albeit essential. But as was mentioned by Doc Villegas, these are the Ateneos, the UPs, the AIMs that can afford to do digital work. What about the rest of the country? Education is a pillar here, and going to a classroom is a form of, it's a social reprieve for the poor. It's their way to have equalization.
Yeah, thank you, Danny, for the opportunity. Thank you for the great question. If we take a longer point of view from history, the educational industry has been one of the industries that have had probably the least amount of innovation compared to other industries that have been presented today. In fact, the adoption of K-12 several years ago probably was the single most largest restructuring of education since maybe in 100 years or since the war. So the education industry, along with the healthcare industry and actually government, were clearly identified before the crisis actually to be the top 3 industries that would benefit significantly from a digital transformation and from some kind of disruption, basically. So if we look at the trend in the past of our traditional system, we've seen already trends where the performance of students along standardized test scores and other metrics of performance have not really been improving that much, and it's been declining. And this is worrisome in the context that our country has a very large youth population. Our economy is very service-oriented. And, the future security and stability of a lot of people moving forward really depends on their ability to get a good education, learn marketable skills, learn thinking skills, have social skills, etc. So there's a lot of skills needed for our young population to thrive in the future. And the real question is the old system really the best system to teach those skills? And I think that, it's hard to change the educational system, but because of COVID-19, we finally have this opportunity to review all of these assumptions about how education should be run. And if you look at the other side, Danielle, we're looking at online courses where the marginal additional cost of having or attending a course is basically zero. So you have online courses where the additional cost for a student to join is zero, and then you have the traditional where you have this huge overhead. But the reality is probably the best system moving forward is somewhere in the middle. So I think what's really going to happen with most educational leaders is that they have to have one eye on the short term and another eye really on the long term. In the short term, we really need to focus on the health and wellness of the students. And if that means that students must remain at home, then they really need to develop the modality to run classes from home, from different communities nationwide. Now, I'm just going to say this. Hopefully, this might turn out to be the most controversial statement today. But I believe that education by itself, this industry alone, should be the number one reason why infrastructure, broadband infrastructure, should be laid down throughout the country in every barangay and every barrio, because it is guaranteed in the Constitution that every child needs to have access to free education. So if we can find a way to actually lay down infrastructure throughout the country, this might be the number one reason why we should do it, because we will be pivoting to an educational system that will be blended, and the students will need some kind of digital access from wherever they are. The reality is that the students themselves, I think, they're much more open to the digital interfaces and the digital tools than perhaps many of their teachers. Okay, so the normal experience in schools is that the kids are way ahead of the teachers in terms of digital adoption. So I think the challenge really is, in the short term, schools need to continue the classes and ensure that classes and exams can continue. But the reality is, there is a big opportunity for new opportunities here. There's a new many parents are choosing for homeschooling. I'm sure there's many opportunities for blended, for problem-based, so new methodologies. But what is sure is that the need for infrastructure and affordable, fast digital infrastructure throughout the country is necessary. And I think if we want to radically change the outcomes of our educational system, we really need to consider some kind of moonshot investment in telecoms. And hopefully education, the education industry, and the desired change that we want in the education industry could be that reason to make that massive investment in telecoms. But of course, the other thing is this. I think from a values point of view, we really just need to decide in favor of the students. What's best for the students? What's best for their ability to learn? And if some members of the educational industry are having challenges adopting to the new system, then we need to make investments to support them, retrain the teachers, retrain administrators, help administrators understand how to run the new business model of education, and so on and so forth. But we really, really have to put a very high priority on ensuring quality educational experiences so that the outcome for students is there, because literally they are the future of this country. How well our students are, and how skilled they are, and how marketable they are, and how competitive they will be in the future, and how creative they will be, will really spell the difference between our country becoming a really super great country and maybe just being an okay country.
Thank you, Prof, for those insights. I'm with you on that. I mean, the online versus face-to-face is not the question here, but rather the technology should not be a discriminating factor in the quality of education that one receives. So thank you so much for those insights. Now, at this point, we will be gathering your questions from social media, and also just continuing the conversation and bringing back our panelists.
To everyone who has tuned in with us this afternoon, join us and be part of the discussion by keying in your questions via the One News Facebook Live chat or One News YouTube channel.
Okay, so while we are on the topic of bringing broadband internet to all the regions in the country, I want to bring back in Mr. Jovi Hernandez, and also to discuss a bit more. I have so much questions actually for the presentation of Mr. Cyrus. So bringing back Mr. Cyrus Mewawalya to answer some of the tough questions here, and of course Doc Bernie Villegas here with us. There you go. Okay, so gentlemen, I'll kick off with Sir Jovi. We heard that statement, infrastructure. If that is just fixed, then everything else is going to be okay. To what extent are we on that path? And to what extent were we prepared as a country, infrastructurally wise, data wise, broadband wise, for this kind of new normal?
Danny, I think parang mo na rin sinabi na it's not fixed, no? But anyway, the
Not an honest conversation, sir.
The objective of I'm sure all the telcos in the country is to reach everybody. In fact, in terms from a schooling perspective, we even have a program in Smart called School in a Bag, wherein we have one backpack, we have a satellite communication service, we have a laptop, and a learning module that we send to the far-flung areas of the Philippines. But I need everybody to understand that it's more than just broadband. So while you have broadband connectivity, and we can try to bring down the price as much as possible, a big portion of that is really making sure that the content is here locally, so that so we can have quantity of broadband connectivity, but we will talk about quality again. Now, if all of the houses, for example, have broadband, when the student now accesses the content, but if it has to go all the way to the US or in Singapore, in Australia, because it's not locally cached here in the Philippines, then we're going to have an issue. So it's not simply just putting broadband as the all-two solution. But that being said, in the PLDT group, we are now taking a very serious look at the educational sector. Yes, we're working with DepEd, we're working with CHED. Right recently, we were whitelisting the DepEd Commons, which is for the public school system. But what we've looked at is the learning management systems that the schools have implemented so far. There is a potential for us to actually, here's an idea, Danny. If we can consolidate all of the data or all of the learning modules that each student must access, for example, in a central data center, so that we can make sure that the way the students can access the data is going to be more seamless, regardless of what your broadband is. Because today, even if you talk about the Philippines, we have more than 100% penetration on mobile phones. So a key question, if the BPO industry can do work from home using a wireless device, right? Why can that not be a potential solution for education? I mean, if we talk about homes, we're going to talk about, are we going to give them laptops or desktops? And there's a whole equation again of asking ourselves, where do we get all of these to give to all the Filipinos? But each Filipino today has a mobile device. So if we are able to capitalize on that equation and find a way so that each typical Filipino can access using the mobile device as their learning tool, then that could be a possibility. So my answer to that is yes, I agree with Professor. He was my professor in AIM, so I should agree with him. But yeah, there is a way. There is a way, and we're studying that very closely now, and we're working with government because, on a personal note, I also have kids, right? I want to make sure that if the worst thing happens, they should be able to continue their education. So the focus now, at least for the PLDT Group's perspective, is moving from a revenue focus to a service focus. Kalimutan muna natin yung revenue, di ba? How are we going to help the Filipino continue? That's the big moonshot project we have right now, as the professor put it.
Thanks, sir. And actually, it's not just about service, but it's also the need for it. So that will also translate to profits in the future, because that's actually what we need. I just wanted to jump on that point for Doc Bernie, who is also an academic and who had highlighted, sir, in your presentation, the fact that our demographic, that we are young, is what will help us during these times. We are a healthy population. We like to spend. Sir, just jumping off on the education point, do we have the literacy that it takes to cope with these times where people need to upskill? Is our training programs, do we have the training programs to equip the people to suddenly work from home today?
Definitely not yet. So it's the short term versus the long term. As Professor Cruz said, definitely over the long term, we have to make sure that every child has an equal opportunity also to receive education digitally. But let's be realistic. As we know, there have been studies show that most Filipino children cannot even read, very poor in arithmetic. We're one of the lowest in the world ranking. So we still have to find out how we can remedy that by the traditional means of classroom teaching. So let's say, I think that would still be the next 5 to 10 years. But as Joey was saying, I'm very glad it's the private sector that is focusing on infrastructure related to the digital world. Because I would like the government to focus practically most of their efforts on solving the problem of the poorest of the poor, who are in rural areas, and what they need are farm-to-market roads, irrigation systems, post-office facilities. These have been neglected in the past, and we have to do a lot. So I'm very glad that there is this division of work with the private sector that will address, let's say, the modern economy, but our agricultural revolution has not yet happened, and that is because we have not endowed the countryside with the appropriate infrastructure. Now, let me just say that the Facebook that I mentioned, which is one of the 7 Fs, I think that is definitely a sunrise sector. Everything that has to do with digital goods and services will rebound immediately after normalization is introduced. And I'm very glad that it's in the hands of the private sector, with, of course, help from the government in terms of the appropriate regulation. So that's...
Yes, sir. So it blows my mind how, you're saying that we lag in terms of education and the quality of that. But then we are one of the best when it comes to IT, BPM processes. We are one of the most digitally literate kind of countries. So it's such a disconnect when you think about it.
That's the advantage of large numbers. As you know, there is the field of large numbers. We had 110 million workers, but 1 million workers among 110 million workers are still a very small percentage. And that's why our Constitution says every Filipino child must have the right to education. So that's the worry that we should address.
Thank you, sir. 110 million people, indeed. Let's move on to Sir Cyrus. I have actually a couple of questions on your report. Maybe difficult being at the devil's advocate. First is, to what extent can we rely on data and predictions right now? We actually had one of our biggest tycoons, Enrique Razon, yesterday saying, let's just not make any projections for 2020. It's useless. It's just going to be changing. So that's my first question. And the second, could we have in any way predicted this or been better prepared as a world? And there have been some research saying that scientists had been saying this was about to happen. We did not invest in healthcare enough. and that's why we're suffering right now? Or are you in the camp that this is simply unprecedented? We could not have known. These are things that, you know, even the smartest economists could never have predicted in their books.
Okay, thanks, Danny. They're both good questions. So the first one is, can we rely on the data? So I think there's two types of data. First, actually, the COVID-19 data, so infection rates, death rates, and so on. And as I mentioned in the presentation, different companies, different countries do a different amount of testing, and they have different policies towards recording deaths and infection rates. So actually, I think it's very difficult to compare country to country infection rates, and we should use those rates with extreme caution. So the US is the highest infected country, probably because it's done the most testing. The second is GDP forecast. So economists all over the world, you know, differ on their GDP forecast, but most are downgrading them down, and even the IMF has massively downgraded global economic growth. And I think that will change over time. And what tends to happen is economists, you know, kind of overdo it on the downside and then overdo it on the upside. Your second question, which is, you know, how could we have prepared for this better? And I think the answer is unquestionably yes, we could have. And there's two ways we could have done that. First is using technology, and second is having some kind of buffer. So let's go to the second point first. So many manufacturing companies in the world, Apple, for example, they have a just-in-time management systems, and they weren't really prepared for a global pandemic. Large parts of Apple's supply chain were in China, so when China shut down, you know, Apple was in big trouble. Its share price went down. So I think one of the trends you're going to see is onshoring, a reverse of globalization, a diversification of suppliers from big manufacturing companies. The second way we could have prepared is, you know, companies, or at least listed companies, often distribute large parts of their profits in dividends, and they rely on free cash flow to support them. And many companies have a lot of debt and not sufficient reserves. So I think what companies could have done was to have much more, you know, in reserve. And that's part of the reason why regulators in banking, for example, have reduced capital requirements so that banks immediately have more reserves to lend.
Thank you so much for those insights. So we could have prevented this, and hopefully we can prevent this from happening again in the future. And we have all the cushions to keep us safe for the rest of humanity's future. Thank you so much, Cyrus. Let's bring in another guest, our panelist here. Hi, Sir. Doc Villegas is back also. Let's bring in Ms. Bing as well. Ms. Bing Sibalimhoko. Hi, ma'am.
Yes.
And we've also got Sir Alfie Deato here with us backstage. Yes, just for the next set of questions, ma'am, I had been wanting to ask, because you're a big advocate for MSMEs. And when it comes to the bigger companies, you know, you can see that the Shakey's, Jollibee, these retailers, these consumers are still doing okay in these times. So ones that are really heavily hit are the MSMEs, especially the non-essentials. How can we help them, especially if they're not digital and it's so hard for them to innovate?
Yes. Okay. We've had several, like the SB Corporation, that is going to give them soft loans to help out, because really the micro, small, and medium enterprises compose of 62.8% of the total labor force, and they contribute to 35.7% of the economy and 99.5% of the total establishments. So we definitely have to help them. And the first one is really with the financing for them. And also by the different training seminars that we have been giving in our webinars to really help them in this pandemic, global pandemic season.
Okay, so it's all about training and helping us. We've got Sir Dan Chica also joining us here. Sir Alfie, also just on the logistics side, what is your plan? And I don't know if you can give a position on whether you as an industry, a logistics industry, are favoring lifting of the lockdown already. We're waiting for an announcement from the president. It's probably going to happen today. Are you willing to risk that there might be a second wave of infections if this does happen? Is this something that you feel that you need already right now?
Well, actually, for one, today we continue to deliver. In fact, we have not stopped our operation since the start of this crisis. So we just used and implemented a lot of safety, both for our customers and for our employees. Obviously, disinfection of cargo, disinfection of the workplace, and all that has helped to ensure the safety. In terms of favoring for the lockdown to be lifted, I think it all boils down to the government. Now, we will follow whatever the government follows. Obviously, for business to continue, I think it's good for all of us to have this lockdown finished. However, the government, I think, still knows better than all of us with all the data that they have, and we will stick and adjust our operations based on what the government dictates. No, and obviously, we await what the government will announce either today or sometime this week.
Sir, Doc Bernie, can you comment on that? I would really love to hear your position on should we be gradually lifting the lockdown already on May 1st, and how should we go about it?
Thank you very much. It's the most important statement I'm going to make tonight. It is very important that we focus not on GDP growth. You know, it doesn't matter even if I'm wrong if the 2%. The most important concern we have right now are the 4 million households who are below the poverty line, the poorest of the poor, and the other 8 million households who are low income but not poor, but can easily fall below the poverty line because of lack of employment. These are the people we have to think of in making a decision. And right now, there is so much talk about the dilemma between lives today and livelihood. Actually, that's a false dilemma. Because if these 12 million households who are not being nourished appropriately, cannot have access to make sure that the immune system is strong, in the future they will die. Not necessarily because of coronavirus, but other diseases. So it's really lives today against lives tomorrow, which means we have to open up the economy on May 1st. There is no doubt in my mind that the poorest of the poor and the low income but not poor are the people who should be primary in our mind. I'm afraid many of our decision makers are still thinking of us, people who belong to the 5% households in the income bracket. We have to think of the 12 million households who are now struggling just to keep body and soul together. And what they need is employment. So I think we should risk with all the safety measures. I'm sure Bing knows that. They can introduce all the safety measures in their stores and so on and so forth. But we have to open factories, stores, and so on and so forth to a certain degree. So we address the problem of these 12 million households. I'm very glad Bing mentioned all the help we will give to MSMEs. These low income but not poor people are mostly employed by MSMEs. And they're the ones who are right now not eating enough, not having enough access to medicine, and we are actually destroying their future if we don't open up the economy as early as possible.
Okay, so let's take a risk right now. Sir Dan, do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's...
Without a vaccine,
Yeah, it's an interesting balance between the safety of workers, and the economy, right? But you know, I was actually misquoted in the papers by saying I'm advocating for total lifting of ECQ. I am not, but what I would like to have the government consider is a modified or selective quarantine, and for the reasons that Bernie also mentioned. You know, in the industry, we have 400,000 direct workers, but another 2.8 million indirect, which and some of them are actually below the poverty line as well. So how do they get fed? How do they eat? there is actually demand in the industry. In fact, some of our companies are facing a backlog, but we are anxious to do it in a measured way. First, we're not going to sacrifice the safety of the workers. In fact, I know we had a meeting with Secretary Lopez, and we presented what the best practices for employing social distancing, QR codes for tracing should any of the employees show symptoms. Wearing, issuing thermometers, wearing of safety masks. In fact, the industry has donated something like 34 million pesos in PPEs to our frontliners. So we have ample PPEs that our workers can use. And so we're thinking more of like progressive increase from our skeletal 30% to 50%, and maybe higher. And so remember, if we're talking about the new normal instead of business, in terms of our business practices, well, guess what? We're going to do a lot more of working from home. We're going to be using technology. Guess what drives those engines of technology? It's the electronics component that are produced by our industry. So yes, we would like to see an increase in our capacity to produce, to export, but then again, it will not be at the expense of our workers.
Okay, so progressive lifting is actually what you're discussing here. Let's try to get Sir Ray Untal with us on our screens here, as well as Sir Lito, to react to Dr. Dan's what he's saying, and not a total lifting ECQ, but a gradual progressive lifting. But there, even on that front, there's still been debates. Should it be by barangay? Should it be by sector or by industry? For example, sir, let's kick off with the IT BPM. You mentioned this could actually go on forever. Diba? People could actually be working from home 100% as some companies under your umbrella work from home. So it's not necessary yet for your industry to have a total lift, or am I mistaken?
And that is a very fitting question. And in fact, I addressed a group of country managers just last Friday, where we talked about a framework that we have developed in terms of a gradual exit from ECQ and specific recommendations for the IT and BPO industry. And we did say that for those who are currently doing work from home and doing it well, for them to continue doing that. But at the same time, we are looking at this space for us to further increase the number of productive employees. No? So it will be a combination of us further optimizing work from home, as well as slowly bringing back the workforce into the offices. Because one of the issues that we also encountered was that, infrastructure constraints limited people from, in fact, working from home, or client-specific requirements also prevented that. And last, we also have information security considerations that simply do not allow it just yet. And now we have to contend with the next challenge, which is transportation, right? And we are looking at some entities who are doing a detailed study on this, but we more or less imagine that we will in fact contribute by putting forward our own company shuttles and maybe use of private vehicles. But this is going to be gradual, and even the conversation around considering the use of rapid test kits for people that are coming back is on the table. And several other considerations.
Thank you, sir. Let's bring in Sir John to join us here on our streams here, just to contribute as well to the discussion. But let's ask Sir Lito. Sir, what will the new normal be looking like? Let's say the lockdown is eventually lifted, as it probably will be. Will banking industry simply stop, having openings in terms of their branches? Will they be really shifting to digital? Kasi are you expecting much less foot traffic in these sectors, and how will banks be adjusting?
Well, I think it would be very difficult for us to, even very difficult for government, in fact, to decide on whether to have a modified ECQ or totally lift the ECQ. Because again, to the point of Ray a while ago, I mean, the ecosystem, we have to look at the ecosystem that this would really cover. For example, having to go to the branches, for example, or having to go to bank offices would require transportation, right? So imagine most of our workers would be taking the mass transport system like MRT, LRT, the jeepneys, etc. And we all know for a fact that this is just like, the congestion in those transport system is really a major issue. So in fact, I was looking at one of the news items by the DOTR saying that we are expecting that most of the jeepneys or public utility vehicles would only be able to convey around 30% of their capacity because of social distancing. So how do you now expect normalization of government or offices or banking in the branches, for example, or even in other enterprise companies, if we have those issues as well? Because uh, the transport system, the other interaction of those people who are traveling, will definitely may potentially there will be some resurgence of the disease. Because I think one thing is on the how to lift it and how to keep it lifted for a certain period of time. So because what we don't want is that once it is lifted, then say after 1 week or 2 weeks or after 1 month, then government will say again, okay, we are again declaring a lockdown. So it will be very disadvantageous to all sectors. I think it has to be the decision has to be based on data. It has to be based on the recommendations from some experts, and also I think learnings coming from other countries experiencing the same thing, right? And I think to your question, Danny, about banking, I mean, while banks will be able to open some of the branches, because right now the branch network is down to about less than 50% because of the various lockdowns in various barangays, so and other LGUs. But the question there is, will the consumers be open or be brave enough to really get out of their homes or their offices to go to bank branches and do their own banking? That's why I think even beyond ECQ, we will see a surge, a sustained surge of digital transactions happening in the long haul.
Thank you, sir. So interesting points there. Even if I wanted to go back to work, I might not have the public transport means to do so.
Yeah.
The social distancing is strict impositions might not allow me to do my job properly anyway. So we've also welcomed into our stream Prof. Cruz. Welcome, sir. I just for Sir John, especially when you talk about data, etc. One thing I've noticed during the ECQ is the fact that a lot of people working, for instance, in the bank, like Lito or IBPAC, there's so much sensitive information, and they could not actually work from home. Is this something that is always going to be there? There's always going to be a concern on data security that might be a hindrance in how we are going to be moving forward. Especially now, even simple things are like Zoom meetings and things like that, and a lot of these security issues have come about. How can we circumvent these?
That's true, Danny. No? Basically, I mean, if it's corporate data, it's supposed to be in your corporate offices or your headquarters. No, it's not really was meant to be brought home. Now, because a lot of companies or organizations have suddenly just rushed work from home, they included actually, not only their laptops or desktops, but also confidential documents at home. Now, that becomes a real vulnerability for the organization because you don't actually know how the data is being managed at home, right? There are guiding policies in terms of how to store it and how data is actually moved. But in these situations, a lot of those policies have been broken. So we actually really recommend a review of data privacy policies. And at least there should be guiding policies on on how data is used or how data is transmitted or moved. In some organizations, because data is just so manual, um, there was really no way of operating the business. But again, we keep on sharing or talking to our customers that there is actually cyber and data privacy risk because of work from home. We, in fact, just had a recent situation where a customer talked to us. They employed all endpoint protection in all of their devices, but then again they were attacked, via ransomware. So we're helping them today, but there needs to be a renewed assessment, no, in terms of how data privacy or cybersecurity works on a different conditions like work from home, because all of the policies were designed previously based on a corporate office-based scenario, not necessarily bringing work to your home. So there has to be a lot of assessments. There are consultants, like for our from our organization, we have consultants that can actually help guide organizations to ensure that there is cybersecurity and data privacy protection.
Okay, so ang hirap, no? It's not just about the technology and the infrastructure being there. It's about the proper way of using the technology that is actually available. And just to wrap up, this very interesting talk. My question for Sir, for Prof. Richard Cruz. I know actually, sir, that you're also into innovation. You consult for big companies, so you're not just in the academe, but you're very much in this space. In your observation, you mentioned that we are still severely lagging in terms of general education in the country. There's a lot to be done. When it comes to upskilling in industries and what you've been observing right now, which are low-hanging fruit here that we can truly harness, and are the things that we need to cherry pick for us to get through this pandemic and these tough times, and I don't know, steer the engines going on for the economy.
Yeah. Okay. So there's really a big need for employment generation moving forward, and there's also we need to align the opportunities for employment creation and the opportunities for industrial innovation. So the two industries that I particularly would be very excited to see a lot of new participation would be in agriculture. So there's a big need for us to improve the productivity and value out of agriculture. And we need to bring in a lot of new entrepreneurs and new people with new skill sets to really envision that next generation agricultural system, because we cannot afford to have this kind of low level of food security, especially if another breakout happens in the future. So in the short run, agriculture is one. And, in relation to education, let me just, as part of answering the question, do I agree with reopening the economy? I found Mark Zuckerberg's announcement recently saying very explicitly that the employees of Facebook should not expect to go back to work anytime soon in 2020. And they would be very happy to work from home and let other industries that rely more on their employees going out into the physical world to be the first users of public transport and medical facilities, etc. So I think my recommendation would be, in the Philippines, we need to have industry leaders declare early on, and I think the BPO industry is one of these industries that very early on, they're already saying that we don't need to go back to work on April 30. We're okay. We can commit to investing more from work from home, improve the security, improve the productivity, provide more psychological support, more training to support the work from home. But honestly, let's be very clear about which industries really need to get out their employees out to work. And I think a lot of these industries are the ones that deal with physical products, food, where it requires physical connections. But most of the service industries, I think, if they announce early that even if the quarantine is raised or lifted in April 30, we don't need to, then I think, that's the time that we can invest more on training, create new types of jobs. There's a need right now to create a lot of content. Digital content creation now is like the most important thing. That's our currency right now. That's the thing that we consume on a daily basis, and we need to bring in hundreds of thousands of people from the creative industry on platforms so that we can easily access talent that can create digital content. And this demand is not just in the Philippines, but it's throughout the world. So honestly, my bottom line here, Danny, is this: we need better communication among industry leaders and government leaders. We need to spend more time sharing ideas and then taking note of innovative ideas and then acting on them. My biggest fear is that as a nation, we have great leaders, great potential, great minds, but we're underperforming because we don't have the right relationships in order to coordinate and tap into other resources and start innovative ideas, etc. So I think at this moment in time, the biggest innovation that the senior leaders can do is get on more Zoom calls together and talk more, do this more. I'm waiting for all of our big taipans in the Philippines to have a screenshot, all of them. I won't name them anymore, but I am waiting for the day that all the taipans are in one screenshot of a Zoom conference and them coming out with a joint vision statement saying, I think this is how we should define our relationships moving forward, and this is how we need to coordinate with each other and innovate and collaborate and create, etc. So this has been my advocacy the past several days. We need to think of old competitors. We just have to forget about that. I'm happy that Jovi said, let's forget about revenue first. Let's think about service. So I hope the banks, I hope RCBC will, under the strong leadership, we'll say, okay, competition, maybe we'll set it aside first, but, we have to work together for service, everybody, right? So I love RCBC. So, I'm just saying that we need to innovate the way we think about our relationships with one another.
Great way to wrap this up, Prof. Cruz. It's the time for the private sector to be pitching in, not individually, but actually as a unit here. That reminds me actually of what Cyrus had presented earlier on. The only way for a vaccine to actually happen is when the biggest, drug producers come together and bring their minds together to come up with that vaccine. So if you're having several vaccines going on, it's going to be very difficult. So it's same sentiment here. And so thank you so much for those insights. Thank you, Sir Ray, Prof. Richard Lito, and of course, John, for joining us together with the rest of our panelists today. That was a very first step, hopefully, as Prof mentioned, the first step in bringing together industry leaders, hoping that this just kickstart more discussions that we need. And this is the time to be going on Zoom meetings with different industry leaders. Hopefully, this will not be the only webinar that will be showcasing this kind of insights and questioning and search for solutions in these very, very difficult times. So thank you so much for joining us. I think more than 1,500 live viewers here on our stream, and we will be replaying this as a TV special on May 1st, so make sure to stay tuned for that. This has been Tech Talk on Air, brought to you by PLDT Enterprise together with One News. I've been your host, Dr. Danny Laurel. It's been such a pleasure moderating this session, and we hope you enjoyed together with us. Have a wonderful afternoon.